Just have a special announcement for my listeners. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for listening. Started off as an experiment in August, but I've had about 2,000 listens of my podcasts, and I'm so grateful. I have a special request for my year-end episode 2020, which has been an incredibly interesting year. I plan to do an episode of listener feedback. So what I'd love for you to do is leave me a message, and the link is in the show note, about what you took away. What was one thing after listening to several episodes was the most impactful to you, that helped you in some way, or was an insight you hadn't thought about before? If you can do that, then I will be sharing some of those insights. You can see that link in show notes. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast. I'm your host, Shaquille Barmal. I'm the CEO of Ocean Blue Strategic and partner with the Summit Group. I'm a coach, consultant, and speaker, and I help leaders, entrepreneurs, and sales professionals make an impact through improved performance. In this podcast, I share insights and interviews with interesting leaders to define practical lessons that you can use to make an impact in the face of uncertainty. In 1980, a child was born to a healthcare worker and a teacher in war-torn Kabul, Afghanistan. That child grew up hearing stories about the golden era, what life was like before he was born. Instead of feeling resentful for not seeing those wonderful times, he decided to choose hope and equipped himself with the skills to help the people of his country get access to basic healthcare they needed. And so began his life of service. I met Fawad 7 years ago when he came to Canada under some very difficult and unusual circumstances that might have broken many. Instead, he once again chose hope and continued his journey to develop his leadership capability. Today, Fawad is responsible for Canadian global health programs that impact more than 3 million people in some of the most difficult parts of the world, including his home country of Afghanistan. Listen as we talk about his practice of servant leadership. Hi, Fawad. How are you?
Hi, Shaquille. I'm good. How are you?
Really well today. Thanks for making the time for this call. I've been looking forward to this conversation. You know, Fawad, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but you know, the first time I became aware of you as a person, I was sitting in my office, and the head of our organization, where I worked before and where you work now, came to me and basically closed the door and said, we'll be having a new employee coming to us from Afghanistan. We need to find a way to structure a position in our budget for him at about this level. And I was a little taken aback because we had just got our budgets approved and everything was done. I was saying, how am I going to find money for this additional person? And you were faceless to me. I didn't know who you were. You were just I had to find a place in the budget. And so we made it all work, and you came over. And Fawad, the first day, my first understanding of you on that day you arrived from Afghanistan was when our one of our staff members came to me and said, have you met Fawad? I said, no. Oh, this is his first day, because he's incredible. Like he's like amazing. And I didn't know exactly what she meant. And then a few days later, it took us a few days for us to actually connect. You came to see me in my office, and we had an amazing conversation. You were so positive and so classy. And I understand the circumstances that you left Afghanistan were not ideal, but here you were standing in front of me, and I thought immediately, what an asset to our organization. How lucky we are to have him. And so I'm telling you now that I went from a position of how am I going to find room in the budget for this person who I don't know to, oh my goodness, this person is priceless. And so thank you for that. I don't think I ever told you that story.
No.
That was my recollection of my first time meeting you.
Well, thank you, Shaquille, for this sentiment and for taking me back to those times. It feels like a long time ago, 7 years ago now. Yeah, of course, a lot of emotions are connected with those times. Of course, I was, as we say, fresh off the boat from Afghanistan, fresh off the plane from Afghanistan. And due to circumstances there, I had to leave everything behind and just come to a different country, different context, different team. But of course, the support and the love and encouragement of you and the teams around me here, they gave Canada and other colleagues and broadly in Canada that helped me overcome those days.
Right.
But thanks. It was a pleasure. It has always been a pleasure knowing you and working with you and getting to learn from you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, let's fill our listeners in a little bit because some of what we're talking about, they have no idea about. So let's go way back first, not way back, but let's go back to talk about what was your profession in Afghanistan? What were you doing for a living?
Well, I mean, it is way back. I'm by training, I'm actually a physician. I'm a pediatrician. Most of my experience in public health and global health. Of course, becoming a doctor was more than just a profession for me. It was a love, it was a passion, it was a sacred thing for me to become a doctor. As I grew up as a child, that's what I always wanted to be. But of course, right after graduation from this medical school, and so being in Afghanistan, it is not easy to find a job that pays you well while you have children and family to support. So that actually, not by choice, by necessity, I moved to public health, and that's where I then stayed. I loved the field of public health. Of course, in the first few years of like having my private practice in the medicine and doing the public health work, I had to balance both and struggle to choose between. And then finally, I made my decision that my future is more in public health and global health than medicine. Of course, this was a big shift. As I said earlier, being a doctor was my passion, my love. So leaving that behind was not an easy decision. But what helped me come to that decision was more based on the facts that I have put in front of me. Why I wanted to become a doctor. Why did I love to become a doctor? There were, of course, main reasons behind it. The key one was that I was seeing the profession of doctor, physician, as a way to serve the Afghan people. Growing up in a middle class family, if you're interested, I can talk about that as well. So all other issues that relates to being in a war-torn country, I developed and built the sense of serving people, and I saw that being a doctor would be one way to do that. But when I moved to public health, I realized that I could actually do that faster with more and bigger impact. And of course, I mean, the other side of this obviously is that you also want to have a living. So I could also have that through this profession, which still is health, but it sees health of not individuals, but broader communities and broader population.
So just you developed this desire to go into medicine and practice medicine because you really wanted to help people. You were growing up in a war-torn country. You were a child through difficult circumstances. You saw what was happening and you chose this path to be helpful to people. And then you discovered this new path, this new opportunity to take your education in health and apply it to public health. You were struggling with that decision because you really love medicine.
Yeah.
But what was the tipping point for you was when you realized that you could take your knowledge and expertise and actually make a greater impact than with the public health approach than you could with practicing medicine and serving patients.
That is correct, yeah.
So it's like, you know, I talk a lot, and Fawad, you and I have talked about this a lot, about the pebble in the water that creates the ripple. And so as a physician, you were a pebble making, you know, some ripples.
Yes.
But in public health, you basically were able to create more ripples and a greater impact. Absolutely. Fascinating. I love that journey.
Yeah, I mean, the other interesting thing in that journey is, and it happens to everyone's life, and in my life, it happened a number of times, that there are circumstances that at that moment, it seems to you as a challenge or as a problem, But then later on, you realize that that could be an opportunity as well. In this case, as I said, my move from health or from being a doctor to being a public health professional was not by choice. So I had to find a job that pays me well so I can maintain my family.
Right.
But so it seemed as a challenge at that time. But now that I look back, I see that I used that challenge and turned it into an opportunity after I moved to public health, and as we just discussed that in the opportunity was to have bigger impact and
Right.
to have bigger satisfaction and fulfillment personally from the public health work.
Right. Amazing. Incredible. Fawad, can you tell me a little bit about um, some of your childhood influences? I mean, you touched on it earlier, but when you were a child, Afghanistan was in a very difficult situation, right?
Yes.
But rather than talk about that first, your parents and probably your grandparents lived in Afghanistan during very different circumstances. Can you tell me something about the stories that you used to hear about what life was like in Afghanistan kind of before the difficult period?
Well, yes, absolutely. My parents call that era the golden era. The golden era because there was a period of kind of towards end of the kingdom and the beginning of Republican system in the country. So that period, about 10 years or so, was an absolutely peaceful period in the country. There were some new reforms in the kingdom that was introduced. So then Afghanistan started having a parliament, and Afghanistan was a touristic destination for the regional countries, even from North America, from Europe. People were coming to Afghanistan as tourists. Of course, economy was not thriving, but education-wise, Afghanistan was advancing way fast. So my parents they have some interesting stories that there were students from other countries, even from Japan. From my dad actually had a friend who was Japanese and came to Afghanistan to study. So they used to come to Afghanistan to study language and other things. So those are the days that my parents had. Unfortunately, my grandparents passed away when I was quite young, so I didn't spend much time with them.
Yeah.
But my parents, that is the memories that they have. Of course, my situation is completely different. I was born right at like a year after the conflict started, and just a year before the Russian invasion.
Yeah. So your parents told you stories of what life was like, and you grew up in a very different circumstance. Can you tell me how you like processed that as a child? Like, how did you take their stories and think about that world versus the world you were living in now? How did you feel about that?
Well, of course, they've started telling us these stories when we were in the middle of conflict in the country. And my father was actually active in politics, in national politics in the country, always remained an opposition. Of course, during the Soviet-backed government, you could only be either with them or against them politically. So, and that also meant imprisonment, assassination, living in hiding, and being scared all the time. So I actually grew up in the middle of all of this, while also hearing from them that we did have some really great times and golden times. So of course there are like all kinds of feelings as a child that you have. That why it's not why I'm not experiencing those times. How is going to be my future? So that those questions, am I going to have experience those kind of days again? So this comes, of course, with the feeling of curiosity. I should say curiosity, sometimes disappointment. But one thing that really, when I compare, of course, as I became a teenager, now when I compare, one thing that really kept us running was hope. Like
Mm,
the country as a whole, my family and myself, we always had this hope that things will improve,
mhm.
because we did have a better days, and this will be temporary. What is happening, so there will be better days, and
Right,
I will have a better future, better education, better
right.
life.
Fawad, that is, I read a lot about resilience, and I'm sure you do too. And, the best simple definition of resilience that I've come across is the ability to be looking at the brutal facts in front of you, the difficult reality that's there right in front of you, but at the same time having the hope that things will get better. Um, if you are just hopeful without facing the difficult facts, you end up getting disconnected from reality and eventually you get very discouraged because nothing happens. But if you can put the difficult stuff first and then have hope, then you're able to actually drive change and move on and carry on and be resilient. And it seems to me, as you talk about this, that's what you did. You understood that things were difficult, but you had hope what was to come. And you took that hope and channeled it to what can I do to create that new future
Absolutely.
by
Yeah.
choosing healthcare.
Yeah. Well, in addition to that, I agree with you, Shaquille. I often think about this, and particularly when I moved to Canada, and of course my family couldn't come with me, so there was about a 3.5 years period that I lived here in Canada alone, and my family was in Afghanistan. That was actually the time that um, I had the time to reflect about
Mm-hmm.
these things.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that comes to me all the time is that all of these things that happened in my childhood and teenage and adolescence period, which includes all the things that I mentioned earlier, and the Taliban and the civil war and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
shaped me as who I am right now, as a person, as
Mm-hmm.
a professional, and as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, of course, informed my political views about the world and what things that are happening in the world. Some others actually built or shaped my ability to assess what is happening in my environment, reflect on them, and adapt. What
Mm-hmm.
we call resilience, right? So, and part of it also built a sense of humanitarian
Mm-hmm.
and a spirit of service to others in
Mm-hmm.
me.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because I experienced not to have things. I experienced not to have access to better health services, to better education services. My, interestingly, I was one of the perhaps maybe better off children in my time, because my mom was a teacher, my dad was a lab technician, so I had a connection with the health sector, a connection with the education sector, and both of them at home. But still, that lack of quality services, lack of access to these services, sometimes even in the last years of the Soviet-backed system, there was also lack of food, even lack of bread, which is the basic necessity, or lack of electricity. So those things also built a sense of humanitarian in me, and a sense of how can I do, how can I serve people, so as much as I can. Of course, we can't solve all the problems in the world. So others don't experience these things,
Yeah.
or experience it with less intensity. That's another reason that I actually moved to this, or stayed in the public health sector.
Oh, very good. So, you said an interesting thing and you did it in passing, but I want to go and spend a little bit of time there. Um, we won't go into detail about the circumstances by which you left, but let's just say there were very difficult circumstances by which you came to this country.
Yeah.
Um, in that process, you had to leave your family behind for a period of time until you got settled here and everything was clear for them to come. And so that you're saying during that time you had, was it a couple of years?
3.5 years, in
You had
fact.
3.5 years on your own with your family there, um, to reflect. And this is when you came to these realizations about the lessons you learned from your life experience so far, and it solidified in you what your takeaways were and allowed you to be even more grateful with what you were doing and what you're choosing. Did you do anything special to reflect? Was there any kind of process you used to reflect, or was it just literally just the thoughts that rolled around in your head doing when you were all by yourself?
Well, I mean, there's a habit I have. It is not something that I gained only when I moved to Canada, but it's a at the end of each day, I take some time to reflect. Whether that was when I was a student at medical school, or before that, or after I continued working or started working. So at the end of my basically business day, I
Yeah.
think about the day,
Yeah.
because days are full of course, lots of successes, but also sometimes not so much successes. So there is always a hiccup or a failure or a disappointment at the end of the day. So I find that reflection therapeutic,
Yeah.
helpful for me to think about things that went well, and how and why,
Yeah.
and things that didn't go well very much, and how and why, because that's where the learning happens. And I can also close it for the day, so I can go to bed with peace of mind.
Yeah.
So that continued, of course, has always been with me. And when I came to Canada, due to circumstances that led me come to Canada, um, I had to do more of that, not only for the day, but for the months before I moved to Canada, and the years before coming to Canada, because those were actually the years that I consider as the best years of my
Mm.
career, the best years of my life, where I had the ability, the energy, the time, and the power and resources to do good.
Mm.
So I reflected on all of those. So a combination of like daily habit plus the circumstances that made me think about why things happened in the way they happened. Could those be different? And what are my lessons learned from those? So others could learn from it, or I could do it better next time.
Hmm. So,
So
Fawad, it seems like what I'm hearing is that it was very intentional and very deliberate, the activity to reflect on your day, what went well, what didn't go so well, what could you learn from it, how will that benefit others, what might you do different tomorrow or next week or next time. But it was deliberate, it was intentional.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. As I said, I find it therapeutic.
Yeah.
It helps me to close the daily chapter with peace. So
Yeah.
even if the day wasn't so successful, which could happen to everyone, and it is part of our life and professional life and personal life,
Yeah.
I find it calming that I
Yeah.
close the chapter. I say, now I learned from today. Now it is time to relax and focus on other stuff.
Very good. Father, can you tell me a little bit about your leadership experience? Like, what has been your kind of realm of leadership over your career in public health? Numbers of people, responsibilities, up until now.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, as you know, Shakil, leadership is now my other passion.
Yeah, yeah,
It is. I see leadership in everything, even in my personal life, in my interactions with my children, with my wife.
By the way,
Uh,
your children are here with you now. They've been here for
yes,
a
yeah,
few years. You've had
yes,
a good life, a normal family life. Uh,
exactly, yeah. So now life is back to normal.
yeah,
Um, in all senses, of course, personally, professionally, and now I'm a Canadian citizen as well. So like it's
congratulations.
my second home now.
Yeah,
So I see leadership in everything, but of course, it was a journey of learning, journey of entry and learning into leadership. Um, if you ask me when I started thinking about leadership, of course, or learning about leadership, perhaps I should say from my childhood. My dad was a born leader, so as I said, he was a lab technician, but he was not made to be a lab technician. He was made to be a leader.
mm,
So in politics, of course, and I grew up learning from him without knowing that is called leadership.
yeah, yeah.
So it was in a few years into my professional work when I got an opportunity to enter a UN fellowship program run by the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. There was a specific program for Afghanistan that accepted mid-level career managers. So I entered into that program. It was a 9-month program. That was when I started learning about the science of leadership,
Mm,
to understand about various types of leadership and what does it mean to practice it. And that was also an opportunity for, of course, it's a structured program, very nice, with some in-class, it's a blended approach. They apply a blended approach there. So there are some in-class learning and then some practical projects that you work on. That was an opportunity for me to reflect on my past and learn what were some of the leadership role models that I could aspire for, some mistakes in leadership that others made and I witnessed that I should not repeat in the future.
Mm.
So that was like quite a journey. And of course, after I finished, graduated as a fellow, they accepted me to be a coach in the program and then as a mentor. And I have been involved with this fellowship program since 2009.
Can I interrupt you there? How old were you during the time of this fellowship program?
Probably 28, 28 when I started, yeah,
Okay.
2029. Still in my 20s.
Yeah.
So and it was, of course, there was so much energy and passion for learning and doing that. And also that was professionally in my work was also a transition time for me, moving from managing a small team to being in charge of a larger program, managing hundreds of people through a smaller team.
Yeah.
So all of these things actually fit very well. So I was learning leadership in theory there, and I had the ability and opportunity to practice it at work.
Yeah.
So that's how my journey started. And of course, over time, I had to do more studies. Thanks to to my organization, Aga Khan Foundation.
Yeah.
They provided me many opportunities to travel overseas, get exposure to different institutions in highly reputable organizations, study leadership in the health sector and all. And of course, over time, I also, of course, I mean, as you grew in the field, I chose to learn and practice. I'm still learning it. The servant leadership approach that I've been practicing since at least past 10 years or so.
Wow. I remember at Aga Khan Foundation Canada when I was working there, we were having a learning day, and you taught a very short session on servant leadership, and our HR manager came to you and asked if you would do that. So when you were doing that session, what were some of the key thoughts, the key principles that you were sharing with the staff, your colleagues at Aga Khan Foundation?
Well, I mean, I shared my own journey in learning of servant leadership, but also what does it mean for me? So I shared the journey just now, but in terms of what does it mean to me, it is more than just an approach of leadership. It is more like a philosophy for me. And of course, it connects with my childhood. It connects with my sense of humanitarian, but also very much fits well with my professional work.
Yeah.
So what we do in the development sector is, in fact, we should feel in the service of people whom are called beneficiary. I actually personally don't like that terminology because that's kind of like a top-down approach. I prefer to call them partner population. So even professionally, I consider myself as a servant to those people, to partner population, because that is the purpose of all kind of international development work that we do. So for me, that the servant leadership approach is that I consider myself as a servant of my team, or in general, the people I interact with, because leadership is not only about your own team, but also is about your peers and your superiors and other colleagues and other people like partner population. So that's what I shared with people, and how I find it also fulfilling to practice it. But also what I shared with our teams was that there's also other side to practicing servant leadership, that if you have to be clearly communicating your intention of practicing servant leadership, particularly with your team and those whom you interact closely, so it's not misunderstood as your weakness.
Yeah.
Because the servant leadership also has a meaning of coaching and facilitation, so your team could grow and become leader of their own. So in those circumstances, if you're not clear, it is easy to be misunderstood that you're not a decisive leader.
Wow.
So you can't support your team in difficult situations. And that's where you can keep the balance between the servant leadership and situational leadership, if you
Right.
will, where you can also then step up and take charge and be decisive when there needs be. For example, in emergency situations in the public health sector, we experience that more often. That COVID-19 is an example.
Yeah.
So as a servant leader, you still continue practicing your leadership style, but you have to step up, be decisive, be quick, because it is not a regular time. It's an emergency situation.
Right.
That's what I shared with the team, and um, yeah.
They react. So I love what you just said there about the balance, right? Like strong leadership requires being empathetic, coaching, mentoring, facilitating other people to solve challenges and achieve their full potential. But it can't just be only that. You also have to be strong, decisive, courageous, move quickly at times. And you need to have both.
Absolutely.
We are in a very, I mean, you've grown up in a very challenging time in a region of the world. We are now globally facing a very challenging time. What advice would you give, given all of the experience you've had of studying leadership from a child all the way through to today, being a self-declared student of leadership? What do you think leaders need to think about now as they are preparing to kind of lead in this next phase of the world?
Yeah, I mean that's that's a question in everyone's mind these days, right? So we live in a completely different world now. More uncertainties and more questions than answers. Things are unpredictable
Yeah.
in whatever sense you feel, whether that's in terms of business and economy, social life, and people's job and everything. So I think in all of that, when you think what is a leader's job, I don't think it is too different than like any regular responsibility that a leader has. Is um, to have the alertness, the agility, to be able to scan the environment regularly
Mm-hmm.
and to adapt with it as things change, because that's what this is the environment we live in. So
Mm-hmm.
that agility and adaptability and and so let me also borrow the terminology that you teach is growth mindset,
Mm.
right? So the growth mindset and being able to to have your antenna up all the time to
Right.
get the signals and
Yeah.
then reflect on it and learn from it and adapt to it quickly, because that's how we should live. It's and of course as we I personally believe that everyone is a leader and everyone is also a follower.
Yeah.
So that is our life. Now in professional life as leaders we are responsible for others as well, to also make sure that they overcome these issues, and how we think about productivity and effectiveness and so on. The other thing I would say is that in these kind of environments, we know that there is more, the probability of failure is higher.
Right.
So leaders' job, I believe, is also to make sure that their team um, is ready, themselves and their teams are ready to accept failures, to understand failures and learn from them.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what is the terminology for it, but an ability to be okay if things didn't go well, but not to just forget it, but to learn from it, to
Mm-hmm.
reflect on it,
Mm-hmm.
and consider it as a learning experience rather than a failure. So I think that is also a responsibility of a leader in these circumstances, and I believe that the years to come will continue to be more uncertain and ambiguous than the past years we had.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So three things I took away was the ability to sense what's happening in the environment. There'll be no certainty, but to constantly be able to get clarity on what's happening around you, maybe a little bit of prediction with this recognition that you might be wrong.
Yeah.
And then being flexible and adaptable to pivot and move to the things you're sensing but also being flexible and adaptable to move when the things that you thought might happen don't happen.
Exactly.
And being prepared for that, which relates to failure, is that when you are working with uncertainty, of course there'll be mistakes and failures because you were guessing in some sense, intelligently, but guessing, and being okay with that, but taking the time to learn. And maybe so it's four things: taking the time to learn and reflect on those things and not just putting them aside and removing the emotional pain of the failure. Delve
Absolutely.
in it, live in it, learn from it. I think that's excellent advice to what excellent advice for leaders today, because the future will definitely be more uncertain than the past for sure. I want to leave our conversation at this. I want to have a big question to ask you about what you're doing now. You started out as a young man with an intent to help people in your country through medicine. You realized that you would have a greater impact if you shifted to public health. The circumstances of life brought you here to Canada. You are now working for an organization, Khan Foundation, that actually is serving the needs of the people of your home country. That's quite a journey. Can you talk a little bit about that? Where do you feel on that journey you are from impacting large numbers of people? Are you, how do you evaluate the number of people that you are impacting in Afghanistan in your role today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shaquille. I well, I mean, obviously, the role that I have is basically global public health. So, and the work we do is global in Asia and Africa. So, I would say for me, the principles that I believed back then are still the same. And that's another thing that a leader should have. So you have to stay true to your values and principles.
Mhm.
Circumstances change, but your values and principles stay. So as I said earlier, I believe that I want to do good to people. Back then, my worldview was smaller,
Yeah,
Afghanistan, because that's where I grew up. That's where I was committed to and still am committed to.
yeah,
But as I moved to Canada, and my worldview has changed. I
right.
started traveling. Of course, even when I was based in Afghanistan, I used to travel, but as an Afghan, as a representative of Afghanistan.
Yeah,
Now I travel as a representative of international organization, being based in Canada in a more developed country.
yeah,
So I also learned about other realities in the world, and
yeah,
I also realized that there are countries, population, circumstances that are even worse than what I experienced and what Afghans experience. It is a reality. So my principle of serving people is still the same, but it is broader. In addition to serving Afghans, it is serving humanity, human being,
wow,
men and women, boys and girls. Of course, my scope of work is limited to my ability and to my organization's ability. But in total, we serve about 3.5 million population every day, every month, every year.
yeah,
So back to your question, my feeling is that I'm still serving Afghanistan through my work and Afghan people. But in addition to that, I'm also serving others who are in similar situation or in better or worse situation. And that is something that really fulfills my professional um, emotions and feelings, as well as my personal ambitions and feelings.
mhm.
Yeah.
So I might be testing your knowledge, but maybe not. How many countries do you now manage programming for around the world?
Well, actively in 11 countries. Well, we have active programs and activities, but the mandate is broad. It is we work in 23 countries, so that is the mandate.
So from your community in Afghanistan to now being responsible, of course, with a team, responsible for work in 23 countries. That's quite a remarkable journey. any sense of the order of magnitude of the number of people that are being impacted by that work?
Well, at least 3 million people are being impacted by the work we do. And I'm grateful that I have a tiny role in that. Of course, it is a larger organization and network that works to deliver those services. And I'm, as I said, I'm very grateful that I play a small role in that.
You know, Fawad, I have this analogy which I may have shared with you, and we talked about it earlier, about we are all pebbles that can create ripples in water, right?
Absolutely.
It's very easy to create ripples when the waters are calm. But if the waters are volatile and there's lots of waves, it's very hard to create a ripple. We're living in a world today where the waters are rocky and rough all the time. But Fawad, from what I've heard today, I've seen an example of a person that is finding a way to create ripples, even when the waters are rough. And I'm just grateful to you for sharing your story with me. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Shakil, for the opportunity.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
So here's what I took away from that conversation with Fawad. First of all, he has an intentional practice of reflection. He looks back on the day's events and identifies the mistakes and failures that he can learn from for the next time. He talked about leadership as being an ongoing practice of learning. Leadership not being a destination, but a pursuit. He didn't describe it that way, but that's what I picked up from the way he conducts himself. He also framed leadership as a service to others, not just your immediate team, but also to society at large. And then Fawad talked about the capabilities we need for the future. The ability to sense what's happening in the environment, to adjust the way you conduct yourself and the actions you take based on that, to anticipate outcomes, to predict outcomes, but expect those outcomes to be wrong and be prepared to adjust and learn again. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did, and have a great day. Thank you for tuning in. If you liked this episode, please do rate or leave a review. It'll help others like you find this show. See you next time.